The barn door swung open on rusted hinges, and the afternoon light cut through the dust like a blade. Gideon Hale stood at the threshold, hat in hand, squinting into the dim interior. He'd come for a horse. That's what the notice said. Livestock auction, south of Crowley Ridge, cash only. But the first thing he saw wasn't livestock. It was a woman. She was kneeling in the center of the barn, wrists bound behind her back with iron cuffs that bit into the skin. Her ankles were shackled together, the chain barely long enough to let her shift her weight. Her dress, once white, now stained with dust and sweat, clung to her frame, torn at the shoulder where the fabric had given way. Her head was down, dark hair falling across her face like a curtain. And when Gideon stepped closer, she whispered it. "Please, don't look there." Not a cry for help, not anger, just shame. Raw and quiet and desperate. Gideon froze. Around her, men stood in loose circles, chewing tobacco, passing flasks, laughing low in their throats. Some leaned against posts, others squatted in the dirt, shuffling cards. None of them looked at her directly. Not because they were ashamed, but because she wasn't worth the attention anymore. The auctioneer was a wiry man with a thin mustache and a leather vest that hung loose on his frame. He stood on a crate near the back, tapping a cane against the wood. "Next one," he called, gesturing toward the woman without looking at her. 19, no kin, no debts. Been sold twice already, so she knows the drill. A few men chuckled. Gideon's jaw tightened. She's cleaned, worked fields, can cook if you got patience. Quiet type, won't give you trouble. The auctioneer grinned, showing yellow teeth. Starting bid's $40. Silence. Gideon's hand tightened around the brim of his hat. He wasn't here for this. He'd come to Crowley Ridge to buy a horse, maybe two, and ride back to his ranch before sundown. He had cattle to move, fences to mend, and a quiet life he'd built brick by brick after the war ended. He didn't get involved in other men's business. He didn't ask questions. He paid his debts, kept his head down, and left the past where it belonged. But this wasn't business. This was something else. 40, a voice called from the back. Gideon turned. A thick-shouldered man in a dusty coat raised a hand, grinning. His companion elbowed him, laughing. 45, another man said, stepping forward. Older, with a scar running down his cheek. He looked her over like she was a plow horse. The woman didn't move, didn't lift her head, just kept her eyes on the dirt, breathing slow and shallow. "Please," she whispered again, so quiet Gideon almost didn't hear it. "Don't look there." He didn't know what she meant at first. Then he saw it. Her left shoulder, exposed where the dress had torn. There was a brand. Old, faded but unmistakable. A letter burned into the skin years ago, the edges raised and scarred. An M. Gideon's breath caught in his chest. He knew that brand. 50, the auctioneer said, tapping his cane. Do I hear 50? Gideon's mind raced. 8 years ago, he'd ridden through a valley just south of here. He'd been trailing cattle for a rancher named Merrick, a man with cold eyes and a reputation for cruelty. One night, Gideon had seen something he wasn't supposed to see. A girl, no more than 11 or 12, being dragged from a wagon. She'd fought, kicked, screamed. Merrick had struck her across the face, then pressed a hot iron to her shoulder while 2 men held her down. Gideon had been 20 yards away, hidden in the trees. He'd done nothing. He'd told himself it wasn't his business, that he was just a hired hand, that speaking up would get him killed and wouldn't change a thing. He'd ridden away the next morning and never looked back. But he remembered the girl's scream, and he remembered the brand. 50, the scarred man called, stepping closer. The auctioneer grinned. Sold to 100, Gideon said. Every head in the barn turned toward him. The auctioneer blinked. Say again. Gideon stepped forward, pulling a roll of bills from his coat. His voice was steady, cold. $100. Cash. The scarred man scowled. You bidding or making a point, friend? Gideon didn't look at him. He kept his eyes on the auctioneer. I'm buying. The auctioneer's grin widened. Well, hell, sold. Gideon crossed the barn floor, boots scraping against dirt and hay. He knelt beside the woman, setting the bills on the ground in front of the auctioneer's crate. Then he looked at her. Up close, he could see her face clearly now. Sharp cheekbones, a scar along her jaw, eyes the color of storm clouds fixed on the dirt, hollow and far away. She didn't look at him, but she whispered it again. Please, take them off. Her voice cracked on the last word. Gideon's throat tightened. The auctioneer tossed him a key ring. Chains stay with the property. You bought her, you unlock her. Gideon caught the keys without a word. He knelt behind her, unlocking the iron cuffs at her wrists first. The metal had rubbed the skin raw, red and angry. She flinched when he touched her, but didn't pull away. Easy, he said quietly. I'm not gonna hurt you. She didn't respond. He unlocked the ankle shackles next, and the chains fell away with a heavy clatter. For a moment, she just sat there, arms limp at her sides, breathing shallow. Then she looked up at him, and for the first time, recognition flickered in her eyes. You, she whispered. Gideon's blood went cold. She remembered him. Gideon didn't move. The woman stared at him, her expression unreadable, somewhere between disbelief and something darker, something that might have been hate. You, she said again, louder this time. Her voice was hoarse, but steady. You were there. The barn went quiet. Gideon swallowed hard. I don't. Yes, you do. She pushed herself up onto her knees, wincing as blood rushed back into her legs. 8 years ago, Merrick's camp, you were in the trees. His chest tightened. She remembered. I saw you, she continued, her voice cutting through the silence like glass. You had a red bandana tied around your neck. You were watching. And then you left. Gideon's jaw clenched. He wanted to say something. Anything. But the words stuck in his throat. The auctioneer laughed nervously. Well, ain't this sweet? You two got history. No one else laughed. The woman's eyes didn't leave Gideon's face. You rode away. You saw what he did to me, and you rode away. Gideon exhaled slowly. I was 23. I didn't... You didn't what? Her voice cracked. You didn't care. You didn't want trouble. You didn't think a little girl being branded like cattle was worth the risk? He flinched. She was right. Every word she said was true, and it cut deeper than any blade. I'm sorry, he said quietly. She laughed, a bitter, broken sound. Everybody says that after. Gideon looked down at the chains on the ground, then back at her. I know. You think buying me makes it better? No. Then why'd you do it? He met her eyes. Because I didn't back then. Silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. The woman's expression flickered. Anger, confusion, exhaustion all bleeding together. She looked like she wanted to scream at him, to hit him, to tell him to go to hell. But instead she just sat there, breathing hard, her hands trembling. Gideon stood slowly, holding out a hand. "I'm not asking you to forgive me. I don't deserve that, but I'm not leaving you here." She stared at his hand like it might bite her. "I didn't buy you to own you," he said. "I bought you so no one else could." Her jaw tightened. For a long moment, she didn't move. Then slowly, she reached up and took his hand. Her grip was weak, but she held on. Gideon pulled her to her feet. She swayed slightly, legs unsteady, but she didn't fall. The auctioneer cleared his throat. "Touching. Real touching. Now get out of my barn." Gideon didn't look at him. He kept his eyes on the woman. "Can you walk?" She nodded, though her legs shook. "Then let's go." They moved toward the barn door, slow and deliberate. The other men parted to let them pass, watching with a mix of curiosity and disdain. The scarred man spat into the dirt. "Waste of $100, friend!" Gideon stopped. He turned his head just slightly and looked at the man. His voice was low, cold. "If you follow us, I'll put a bullet in you." The man's grin faded. Gideon turned back and kept walking. Outside, the sun was lower now, casting long shadows across the dirt road. Gideon's horse, a sturdy gray mare, stood tethered to a post near the barn. He untied her, then looked at the woman. "You got a name?" he asked. She hesitated. "Lena. Lena." He nodded. "I'm Gideon." She didn't respond. He helped her onto the horse, then climbed up behind her. She stiffened at first, but didn't pull away. As they rode out of Crowley Ridge, Gideon glanced back once. The barn stood dark against the dying light, smoke curling from a chimney somewhere beyond the ridge. And in the doorway, the auctioneer watched them go, arms crossed, grinning. Gideon turned forward and didn't look back again. They rode in silence for nearly an hour. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky in shades of red and gold. The land stretched flat and endless, dotted with scrub brush and dry grass. The only sound was the steady rhythm of the horse's hooves and the wind rustling through the brush. Lena sat stiff in the saddle, her body tense, her hands gripping the pommel like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Gideon didn't push her to talk. He knew what it was like to carry weight you couldn't put down. Finally, as they crested a low hill, she spoke. "Why'd you come back?" Gideon frowned. "I didn't. I came to buy a horse. But you stayed." He was quiet for a moment. "Yeah, why?" He exhaled slowly. "Because I didn't before." She turned her head slightly, just enough to look at him from the corner of her eye. "You think that makes it right?" "No." "Then what do you want?" Gideon met her gaze. "I don't want anything from you, Lena. I couldn't walk away again." Her expression softened, just a fraction. Not forgiveness, but maybe something close to understanding. She turned back to face the road ahead. "Merrick's dead." Gideon blinked. "What?" 3 years ago. Someone shot him in the back outside a saloon in El Paso. They never found out who. Gideon didn't say anything. Lena's voice was quiet, distant. "I used to think if I ever saw him again, I'd kill him myself. But someone else did it first." Gideon nodded slowly. "Good." She glanced at him again. "You mean that?" "Yeah." For the first time since they'd left the barn, the tension in her shoulders eased. Just a little. The sun dipped below the horizon, and the first stars began to appear. Gideon urged the horse forward. "There's a ranch about 5 miles from here. It's mine. You can stay there tonight. Figure out what you want to do in the morning." Lena didn't answer, but she didn't argue either, and for now, that was enough. They reached Gideon's ranch just after dark. It wasn't much, a small cabin with a stone chimney, a barn that leaned slightly to one side, and a corral that needed mending. But it was quiet, isolated, safe. Gideon helped Lena down from the horse, then led her inside. The cabin was simple. One room, a fireplace, a table with 2 chairs, and a bed in the corner. A rifle hung on the wall above the mantel. Lena stood in the doorway, looking around like she didn't quite believe it was real. "You can take the bed," Gideon said, lighting a lantern. "I'll sleep outside." She turned to him, frowning. "You don't have to." "I know." She studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Gideon set the lantern on the table, then pulled a blanket from a chest near the bed. "There's water in the basin, food in the cupboard. Help yourself." "Thank you," she said quietly. He nodded and turned to leave. "Gideon." He stopped, hand on the doorframe. "Why didn't you help me back then?" He didn't turn around. "Because I was scared. And now?" He looked back at her, his expression hard. "Now I'm not." He stepped outside and closed the door behind him. The first sign of trouble came 3 days later. Gideon was mending the fence near the corral when he heard it. Hoofbeats. Multiple riders moving fast. He straightened, shading his eyes against the sun. 5 men crested the hill, riding hard toward the ranch. They wore dusters and wide-brimmed hats, and every one of them had a gun on his hip. Gideon's stomach sank. He recognized the man in front, Sheriff Dalton. Gideon set down the hammer and walked toward the cabin, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. Lena appeared in the doorway, eyes wide. "Who are they?" "Go inside," Gideon said quietly. "Lock the door." "Gideon, now." She hesitated, then stepped back inside. The door clicked shut. The riders pulled up in front of the cabin, horses stamping and snorting. Dalton dismounted, brushing dust from his coat. He was a tall man, mid-50s, with a scar running down the left side of his face. His badge glinted in the sunlight. "Gideon Hale," Dalton said, his voice smooth and cold. "Been a while." Gideon didn't move. "Sheriff?" Dalton smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Heard you made a purchase down in Crowley Ridge a few days back." "I bought a horse." "Funny. Word is you bought something else, too." Gideon's jaw tightened. Dalton stepped closer, hands resting on his belt. "See, there's a problem, Gideon. That auction, it wasn't exactly legal, and the girl you walked out with, she's property of a man named Calder. He wants her back." "She's not property." Dalton's smile widened. "Well, that's where you're wrong. War ended 4 years ago, but there's still debts to settle, contracts to honor. And Calder's got a signed agreement that says that girl belongs to him. Agreement's not worth the paper it's written on. Maybe, but Calder's got friends, lawmen, judges, and he's real determined to get what he paid for." Gideon held Dalton's gaze. "She's not leaving." Dalton's expression darkened. "You're making a mistake, Hale. Wouldn't be the first time." The sheriff glanced at the cabin, then back at Gideon. "You've got until sundown tomorrow to hand her over. After that, I come back with more men, and we won't be asking nicely." He turned and climbed back onto his horse. The other riders followed, wheeling their mounts around and riding back the way they came. Gideon stood in the dirt, watching them disappear over the hill. When the dust settled, the door opened behind him. Lena stepped out, her face pale. "He's coming for me." Gideon turned to her. "Not if I can help it." "You can't fight the law, Gideon." "That wasn't the law." His voice was hard. "That was a man hiding behind a badge." She crossed her arms, hugging herself. "This is because of me. You should just let me go." "No." "Gideon!" I said no. He stepped closer, his expression fierce. "You didn't ask to be sold. You didn't ask to be branded. And you sure as hell don't deserve to be dragged back to the man who thinks he owns you." Her eyes glistened. "You'll get yourself killed." "Maybe." He held her gaze. "But some things are worth standing for." She looked at him for a long moment, searching his face for something. Doubt, fear, regret. But all she saw was resolve. And for the first time in 8 years, she felt something she thought she'd lost forever. Hope. That night, Gideon sat outside the cabin, cleaning his rifle by lantern light. Lena stepped out onto the porch, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She sat down beside him, careful to keep a few feet of distance between them. For a while, neither of them spoke. The night was cool and quiet, the sky full of stars. Finally, Lena broke the silence. "You don't have to do this." Gideon didn't look up from the rifle. "I know. Then why?" He set the rifle down, resting his hands on his knees. "Because 8 years ago I had a choice, and I chose wrong." "You were young. Doesn't make it right." She pulled the blanket tighter around herself. "What happened after you left Merrick's camp?" Gideon exhaled slowly. "I rode north, found work on a cattle ranch, kept my head down, saved my money. Bought this place 5 years ago. Sounds peaceful." "It was," he glanced at her, "until a few days ago." A faint smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. "Sorry about that." "Don't be." They sat in silence for another moment. Then Lena spoke again, her voice softer. "After Merrick branded me, he sold me to a man in New Mexico. I worked his fields for 3 years. Then he died, and his son sold me to someone else. Then that man sold me to Calder." Gideon's jaw tightened. "I've been sold 4 times, she continued. And every time I told myself it was the last, that eventually someone would see me as more than property, that someone would—" She trailed off, shaking her head. "That someone would help," Gideon finished quietly. She nodded. He looked at her, his expression pained. "I should have been that person 8 years ago. But you weren't." "No." She met his gaze. "But you are now." The words hung in the air between them. Gideon's throat tightened. He wanted to say something, to tell her he was sorry, that he'd do better, that he wouldn't let her down again. But the words felt too small, so instead he just nodded. Lena looked down at her hands. "If Dalton comes back tomorrow, what are you going to do?" "I don't know yet." "You can't fight 5 men alone." "I don't plan to." She frowned. "What does that mean?" Gideon stood, picking up the rifle. "It means I'm going to ask for help." The next morning, Gideon rode out before dawn. He left Lena at the ranch with strict instructions to stay inside and keep the rifle close. He rode east toward a neighboring ranch owned by a man named Cole Brennan. Cole was an old hand, 60 years old, weathered and tough, with a reputation for fairness. He and Gideon had worked together years ago, back when they were both young and drifting. When Gideon rode up to Cole's ranch, the old man was already awake, feeding chickens in the yard. Cole looked up, squinting. "Gideon Hale, what brings you out this early?" Gideon dismounted. "I need your help." Cole set down the feed bucket, crossing his arms. "What kind of help?" Gideon told him everything. The auction, Lena, Dalton, Calder. When he finished, Cole was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. "All right." Gideon blinked. "All right. You think I'm gonna let Dalton push around a man I branded calves with 20 years ago?" Cole shook his head. "Not a chance." Gideon exhaled in relief. "Thank you. Don't thank me yet." Cole grabbed his hat from a post. "Let's go talk to a few more folks." By midday, Gideon had gathered 5 men, Cole Brennan, 2 ranch hands from a neighboring spread, and a blacksmith from the nearest town. They weren't gunslingers or lawmen, just locals who'd decided they weren't going to let cruelty run their county. They rode back to Gideon's ranch together, arriving just as the sun reached its peak. Lena was waiting on the porch, eyes wide. "What's this?" Gideon dismounted. "Back up." Cole tipped his hat to her. "Ma'am." She looked at Gideon, then at the men, then back at Gideon. "You did this for me." "We did it, because it's right," Cole said simply. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them back, nodding. Gideon stepped up onto the porch, standing beside her. "Dalton's not taking you. Not today, not ever." She looked up at him, and for the first time since they'd met, her anger seemed to falter. Not gone, just cracked. "Thank you," she whispered. Gideon nodded, and then, in the distance, they heard it. Hoofbeats. Dalton was coming. The riders appeared on the horizon, just after 2 o'clock. 6 men this time, not 5. Dalton rode in front, his face hard and set. Behind him, the same deputies from before, and at the back, a 7th man, older, dressed in expensive clothes, with a silver watch chain glinting at his vest. Calder. Gideon stood in the yard, rifle in hand. Cole and the others flanked him, spread out in a loose line. Dalton pulled up 20 yards away, his eyes sweeping over the group. He frowned. "Didn't expect a welcoming committee, Gideon." "Didn't expect you to bring company either," Gideon replied, nodding toward Calder. The older man leaned forward in his saddle, his voice smooth and cold. "I'm the man who owns that girl, and I want her back." "She's not property," Gideon said flatly. "I have a signed contract that says otherwise. Contract's not legal. War ended 4 years ago. Slavery's done." Calder smiled, but it was thin and humorless. "There are always loopholes, Mr. Hale. Debts, obligations. The law is a flexible thing." "Not today," Cole said, stepping forward. His voice was calm, but there was steel in it. "You're not taking her." Dalton's hand drifted toward his gun. "This is official business, Cole. You don't want to get in the middle of this." Cole didn't flinch. "Too late." The 2 ranch hands and the blacksmith shifted, hands resting near their holsters. Dalton's expression darkened. "You're all making a mistake." "Maybe," Gideon said, "but it's our mistake to make." For a long moment, no one moved. The wind rustled through the dry grass. A hawk cried somewhere overhead. Then, from the cabin, a voice rang out. "Enough!" Everyone turned. Lena stood on the porch holding Gideon's rifle. Her hands were steady, her expression hard. "I'm not going back," she said. Her voice was clear, unwavering. Not to him. Not to anyone. Calder's smile faded. Girl, you don't have a choice. Yes, I do. She raised the rifle, aiming it at him. I've been sold 4 times. Beaten, branded, treated like an animal, and I'm done. Dalton's hand moved toward his gun, but before he could draw, Cole's rifle snapped up, aimed at the sheriff. Don't! The other men followed suit, guns drawn, aimed at Dalton and his deputies. The tension was a living thing, coiled tight and ready to snap. Calder's face went pale. You're all going to hang for this. Maybe, Gideon said, but you won't be around to see it. Dalton looked at Cole, then at Gideon, then at the men standing beside them. Slowly, he raised his hands. All right, all right. He turned to Calder. We're done here. What? Calder's voice rose. I said we're done. Dalton's voice was hard. He wheeled his horse around, gesturing for his men to follow. Calder stared at them, his face red with rage. But he had no choice. He turned his horse and rode after them, muttering curses under his breath. They disappeared over the hill, and the sound of hoofbeats faded into the distance. Gideon lowered his rifle, exhaling slowly. Cole clapped him on the shoulder. You did good, Gid. Gideon nodded, too tired to speak. Lena lowered the rifle, her hands shaking. She sank down onto the porch steps, her face buried in her hands. Gideon crossed the yard and sat down beside her. For a long moment, they just sat there, breathing. It's over, he said quietly. She looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. Is it? Yeah. She wiped her eyes, then let out a shaky laugh. I didn't think it would ever be over. It is now. She looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time, the anger was gone. In its place was something softer, something like trust. Thank you, she whispered. Gideon nodded. You're safe now. Weeks passed. Lena stayed. At first she worked, mending fences, tending the garden, helping Gideon with the cattle. She didn't talk much, but she didn't have to. Slowly, the tension in her shoulders eased. The hollow look in her eyes began to fade. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set, she spoke. I've been thinking about Merrick. Gideon looked at her. I used to think if I ever got free, I'd spend the rest of my life hating him, hating everyone who hurt me. She paused. But I'm tired of hating. Gideon nodded. Then don't. She smiled faintly. It's not that easy. I know. They sat in silence, watching the sky turn golden red. What about you? She asked. You still carrying what you did 8 years ago? Gideon was quiet for a long moment. Yeah, but it's lighter now. She glanced at him. Because of me. Because I finally did something about it. She reached over and took his hand. He looked down at their joined hands, then up at her. Thank you, she said again. And this time, he believed her. Years later, travelers passing through the valley would sometimes stop at a small ranch nestled against the hills. The owner, a quiet man with gray at his temples, would offer them water and a place to rest. And if they looked closely, they might notice the woman who worked beside him. Strong, steady, free. She wore a long-sleeved shirt, even in the heat. But if you asked her why, she'd just smile and say nothing, because some scars don't need to be shown. They just need to be healed. The sun dipped lower over the valley, painting the sky in shades of gold. Gideon stood beside Lena, watching the light fade, and for the first time in 8 years he felt at peace.